My name is Miguel, I'm 43 years old, and for 15 years I was the pastor of the Fuente da Vida Church in the Providencia neighborhood of Guadalajara, Jalisco, a big church, wow, 3,000 members, services packed to overflowing, that really cool movement you see in churches that are growing fast. I was respected, had a good salary of 30,000 pesos a month. I drove a brand new Chevrolet Suburban that had cost me 600,000 pesos. My life, at least on the outside, was what any pastor would dream of, right? Married for 18 years to Esperanza, a blessed woman, mother of my 2 children, Sebastian, who was 16 at the time, and Sofia, who was 12. We lived in an apartment on the 12th floor of the Torres del Bosque. We had a comfortable life. We traveled. The kids attended private school. I preached about family, about fidelity, about holiness, and the people listened to me with respect, with that admiration a pastor receives when things are going well. It was March 2018 when the World Cup arrived in Russia, and everyone was very excited that Mexico was going to go far in the tournament. It was March 2018 when she arrived, Valentina, 24 years old, red-haired, 1 foot tall, with that delicate manner that catches any man's attention. She said she was from Mexico City, that she was a missionary, that God had spoken to her to come serve in our church. I remember being in my office that Tuesday morning, organizing the week's sermon, when she knocked on the door. The scent of her perfume entered before she appeared, a sweet, different scent that lingered in the air for hours after she left. He said he had a degree in psychology and that he wanted to help with counseling, especially with young couples. He spoke with a soft, polite voice, and had a way of looking you straight in the eye that, as I explained, seemed like he could see into your soul, right? Esperanza even commented afterward, "What a well-behaved girl, Miguel, God sent such a worker for our church." Valentina said she had studied at the Universidad Iberoamericana, that she came from a very devout Christian family in the south of the city, and that she felt a special calling to work with marriages in crisis. In the first few days, Valentina fit in perfectly with the team. She arrived early, stayed late, and helped with whatever was needed. The sisters at the church immediately took a liking to her, and the men, well, I noticed that some of them were a bit sly around her, but that was natural, right? A pretty, single, dedicated, normal girl who sparked interest. She began working in the office, organizing the appointment calendar, sorting prayer requests, those administrative things that every large church needs. I would stop by several times a day to look for documents, look at the agenda, and chat about the church's work, the church, and every time I arrived, he would smile at me like that, a smile that lasted a few seconds longer than it should have. I tried not to notice, but wow, it was hard not to notice. Sometimes I would leave with my heart beating faster and wonder if that was normal or if I was being tempted. He also told me about his family, how he had grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Mexico City, how he had studied on scholarships because his parents didn't have much money, and that humility touched my heart. The first counseling session we did together was in April, a young couple with marriage problems, jealousy, mistrust, those issues that come up a lot in pastoral counseling. Valentina stayed there taking notes, asking intelligent questions, giving advice that actually made sense. After the couple left, she stayed with me in the office to talk about the case. The room was half dark, the desk light was on, and she was sitting very close, showing the notes she'd made. When she leaned over to show me the notebook, I smelled that scent again, and for a moment, I was lost. I couldn't pay attention to what she was saying, I just stared at her face. The way she bit her lip when she was concentrating. When I realized, she was looking at me with a different smile, as if she'd noticed what was happening. "Pastor Miguel," she said softly, "it's okay, he seems a little distracted." It was a time when everyone was talking about the World Cup in Russia, and she said she didn't understand much about soccer, but that she liked watching because it excited me. "My dad never taught me about sports," she told me, "but I like learning from you, Pastor." The weeks went by, and those conversations in the office became longer, more intimate. She began to tell me about her life, about how she grew up without a father, about the relationships that didn't work, about how she felt alone sometimes, and I began to feel like protecting her, taking care of her, being the man she needed. It was April, the time of the World Cup in Russia, and everyone was incredibly excited about the games. She said she didn't understand much about soccer, but that she liked watching because it made me happy. When Mexico played against Germany on June 17 and we won 1-0, I was in the office watching on my cell phone during the break in worship. She arrived, she sat next to me, and we stayed there watching the game together. Mexico won with a goal from Hervin Lozano, and when he scored, I screamed so loud that without thinking, I hugged Valentina. It was a hug that lasted longer than it should have, much longer. "Come on, Pastor," she said, laughing. "He gets so excited about soccer. I like to see him so happy." But his eyes told me something else, something I knew I shouldn't be interpreting that way. After that day, things changed between us. Our gazes became more intense, our conversations more personal, and I began to make up excuses to be alone with her in the office. I told the other workers that we were preparing a new counseling project, that we needed to focus on planning, and she always got into the game with that smile, always willing to work with me until late. We started talking on WhatsApp, first about personal things, the church, then on other topics. He would send me messages like, "How can I tell him they were turning me on? Pastor, you are very dedicated. Any woman would be lucky to have a man like that taking care of her." Or then I'm left wondering how great it must be to be the wife of a man of God like you. Messages I knew I shouldn't. I didn't answer, but I did, and each response became more affectionate, more intimate. "Valentina, you are a very special woman. God has big plans for your life. I like talking to you. You have a very beautiful way of seeing things." Messages I deleted immediately after sending, but I knew they were building something dangerous between us. The first time we kissed was on a Thursday afternoon, in early July. Esperanza, I had taken the kids to my mother-in-law's house in Tlaquepaque, was going to sleep there and not return until the next day. Valentina knew this because I had mentioned it during our work conversation. She stayed later at the church. She said she wanted to finish some reports. When everyone left, it was just her and me left in the building. I went to the office to close the front door, and when I returned, she was in my office, sitting in my chair checking the computer. "I'm looking at your schedule for next week, Pastor," she said without turning to look at me. "You work too much. You need someone to take better care of you." When she said that, she turned around in her chair and looked at me in a way that was beyond recall. I leaned closer, placed my hand on her shoulder, and before I could even think about what I was doing, our lips met. It was a long, desperate kiss, as if we'd been holding it together for months. Miguel whispered to me, using my name without the pastor for the first time, "I've also had strong feelings for you since the first day I arrived here." Things started happening very quickly after that. Every week we had our work meetings, always when Esperanza wasn't around, always with some excuse ready in case someone arrived. Valentina had a way of planning everything down to the last detail. She always knew when it was safe. When there was no risk, she would say things like, "Miguel, with me I feel like a true pastor's wife. With you, I understand what it's like to have a real man looking out for me," and I felt important, necessary, as if I was saving her in some way. I bought her gifts, a silver chain, a designer perfume, always under the pretext that it was a thank you for her dedicated work at the church. She wore the chain under her blouse, and whenever she was near me, she would stick it out a little bit just so I could see it. It was our secret, our special connection. "This chain was given to me by the most important man in my life," she told me, touching it. "Every time I wear it, I think of you, Pastor, but secrets have a way of coming out, no matter how hard you try to hide them." It was a Monday in July, the 16th, when Esperanza found the messages on my cell phone. I had forgotten my phone charging in the kitchen, and when she went to get it, a message from Valentina arrived. "My dear Pastor, thank you for such a wonderful afternoon yesterday. You make me feel so special. I love you. When I got home from the evening service, Esperanza was sitting at the kitchen table with her cell phone in her hand, her face red from crying. She didn't even need to say anything, she just looked at me with an expression that mixed disappointment, anger, and a deep sadness that broke my heart. 18 years, Miguel, was all she could say. 18 years for this, I tried to explain, to invent some excuse. But the words wouldn't come out. How do you explain the betrayal to the woman who trusted you all her life, who raised your children, who built a family by your side? That night, for the first time in 15 years of ministry, I felt completely lost, unaware that the worst was yet to come. Sunday arrived like any other Sunday in the last 15 years of my life. I got up at 6 o'clock a.m., drank my black coffee without sugar as I always did. I read the Bible for a few minutes, trying to concentrate on the sermon I had prepared for that night. The topic was family blessed by God, a cruel irony considering what had happened the previous Monday. Hope, she had barely spoken to me all week. She slept in the guest room, she avoided being alone with me. The kids realized something was wrong, but didn't say anything. They just stood there, kind of weird, looking at their parents with that look of someone who knows there's trouble in the air, but can't quite understand what. Sebastian, my oldest son, even came to ask me if everything was okay between his mom and me. I lied to him, telling him they were just silly disagreements, that things would soon be fixed, but deep down I knew my family was falling apart and it was all my fault. That morning, as I was getting dressed in the gray suit I always wore to preach, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man standing there. He looked tired, guilty, as if he was carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. I arrived at the church at 8 o'clock a.m. for the first service. As it did every Sunday, the church had that normal Sunday morning buzz, brothers arriving little by little, greeting each other, children running up and down the aisle while their parents tried to keep them in check. Valentina was there in the office organizing the week's prayer requests. When she saw me, she greeted me discreetly with that smile that now caused me more anxiety than pleasure. I no longer knew how to act around her, whether to greet her normally, pretend nothing had happened, or talk about the problems at home. I chose to keep my distance, just say hello from a distance and continue on to my office. But even from a distance, I could smell her perfume in the air, that sweet smell that was now associated in my mind with guilt and shame. It was strange, like something that had once attracted me, so much so, it now made me feel nauseous. I saw her chatting with some sisters from church, laughing, acting as if nothing had happened, as if she wasn't the reason my marriage was about to end. The 9 a.m. service passed without a hitch. I preached about forgiveness, about family restoration, about how God can fix any situation. The words came out of my mouth automatically, as if I were a robot speaking, but my heart was heavy, torn between the guilt of what I had done and the confusion of the feelings I still had for Valentina. After the service, I ate at home in a very awkward silence. Esperanza served the food without looking me in the eye. The kids ate quickly and went to their room to watch television. The atmosphere was so tense that even the air seemed harder to breathe. I tried to chat a few times, to talk about unimportant things, about the week's plans, but Esperanza only answered yes or no, without elaborating on anything. Around 2 o'clock p.m., I returned to the church to prepare for the evening service, which was always the busiest, with an average of 2,500 people. On the way, I passed by the Minerva gazebo and for some reason I remembered taking the kids there on Sunday afternoons, when we were a happy family. At 5 o'clock p.m., I began to prepare myself spiritually for the sermon. I prayed, reread the Bible text I was going to use, and reviewed the main points of the message. But there was something different that day, a strange feeling, as if the air in the church was heavier, denser. I couldn't quite explain what it was, but I felt a discomfort in my chest, an anxiety that wasn't normal. I thought it was because of the problems at home, the situation with Esperanza, the guilt I was carrying. I tried to put that out of my mind, focus on the sermon, on the people who would come seeking a word from God. Valentina showed up at the office around 6 o'clock. bringing the visitation reports for the week and the list of birthdays for the month. We stayed for a few minutes, chatting about church matters, but there was a tension in the air between us, as if we both knew something big was about to happen, but we didn't know exactly what. Pastor Miguel told me before leaving that God would bless him greatly in today's sermon. I feel in my heart that it's going to be a very special message. The service began at 7:00 p.m. sharp. The church was packed, as it always was on Sunday nights. Esperanza was in the second row with the kids, in the place where she had always sat for 15 years. Valentina was in the front row on the right side, in the place that had become hers since she arrived at the church. The worship service flowed normally. The people sang with their usual emotion. They raised their hands and applauded. I was in the pulpit observing everything, waiting my turn to preach. But that strange feeling I had felt earlier only grew stronger. It was as if there was a cold presence in the church, something that shouldn't be there. I looked at Esperanza, who avoided my gaze, then at Valentina, who smiled at me in that way that now confused me. For a moment, it seemed to me that her smile was different, more malicious, as if she knew something I didn't. The worship group was playing Renuvem by Marcela Gandara, a song I always liked. But that night it was playing different, as if the words had a different meaning. When it was my turn to take the pulpit, it was exactly 7:45 p.m. I remember the time, because I looked at the clock on the wall at the back of the church before I began speaking. I began the sermon by talking normally about family, about how God created marriage to be a blessing, about the importance of fidelity and mutual respect between husband and wife. People were paying attention. Some taking notes, others nodding their heads in agreement with what I was saying. But as I preached, that strange feeling grew stronger. It was as if the temperature in the church had dropped 10 grams overnight. I began to feel a chill coming from within, rising up my back and spreading throughout my body. I tried to continue preaching, but I realized that my voice was becoming different, deeper, as if it were no longer mine. Brothers and sisters, I said, the pastor must be an example for his congregation. He must live what he preaches. But something inside me was stirring, as if there was a struggle going on within my soul. That was when the first thing that truly scared me happened. I was talking about the importance of the pastor setting an example for his flock when suddenly a phrase came out of my mouth that I hadn't planned to say. But you don't know that I've been controlling this man for months. The voice was mine, but at the same time it wasn't mine. It was as if someone was speaking through me. I stopped talking for a few seconds, confused, trying to understand what had happened. The people in the church became somewhat restless, whispering to each other, not understanding what I had said. Esperanza looked at me with a worried expression, and Valentina was looking at me with a strange smile, as if she was satisfied with something. I tried to return to the sermon text, pretending nothing had happened. But I felt like I was losing control of the situation. It was as if my mind was being invaded by thoughts that weren't mine. Excuse me, brothers, I said, trying to compose myself. Sometimes the Holy Spirit gives us words we don't understand at the moment, but deep down I knew that wasn't the Holy Spirit. Things quickly started to get worse. The division began to darken at the edges, like when you're about to faint, but at the same time I could see everything with a strange clarity. The people in the church looked distorted, as if they were seeing through fogged-up glass, and then, without me being able to control it, I started saying things I had no idea where they came from. You think you know this man, but he's living a double life. He's cheating on his wife with his secretary. He lies to you every Sunday. It was my voice, but I wasn't consciously saying it. It was as if someone had taken control of my mouth, my mind. The people in the church began to stir. Some stood up from their chairs, others began to pray out loud. Esperanza was pale, with her hands over her mouth, clearly shocked by what she was hearing. And my children, my God, my children were looking at their dad with a look of terror I'll never forget. Pastor Miguel. Deacon Roberto shouted from the front row, calm down, brother, but I couldn't calm down because it wasn't me anymore. The scariest moment was when I realized that I couldn't even control my eyes. I felt like they were changing, becoming different, and from the reaction of the people in the church, I knew something visible was happening to me. Later, I realized my eyes had turned completely black, without a pupil, just a deep darkness that frightened everyone. Valentina, who was in the front row, suddenly began to speak in strange tongues. It wasn't a spiritual language like the one we know in church. They were guttural sounds, words that seemed to come from another world, and then she fainted, falling from her chair to the floor, her whole body shaking as if she were having convulsions. It was at that moment that Esperanza screamed, "That's not my husband anymore, that's not Miguel anymore." The deacons rushed up to the pulpit to try to hold me down, but when they touched me, I had a strength that was beyond my normal. I could have pushed 3 grown men at the same time without any effort. "Get me out of here," Sebastian shouted from the second row. "That's not my dad," and then everything went black. The last thing I remember is the sound of 2,500 people screaming in panic at the same time, a sound that echoed throughout the church and that I'm sure the neighbors on Lopez Mateos Avenue heard from outside. When I woke up, I was on the pulpit floor, surrounded by the deacons, Esperanza crying beside me, and Valentina. Valentina had completely disappeared from the church. After what happened Sunday night, I returned home in a state of total shock. The deacons led me to the truck because I was still a little dizzy, confused, and not quite understanding what had happened to me in the pulpit. Esperanza drove in silence. The kids in the back seat whispered to each other, clearly frightened by what they had witnessed in church. Sebastian, my oldest son, asked quietly if I was sick, if I needed to go to the doctor. I didn't know what to answer. How do you explain to a child that his father had just gone through a supernatural experience that even he can't understand? When I got home, I took a long bath, letting the hot water hit my face for long minutes, trying to process everything that had happened. Esperanza put the kids to bed and came to talk to me in my room. For the first time that week, she looked me in the eye with genuine concern, not anger. "Miguel," she said, grabbing my hand, "you need to tell me what's really going on. What happened there wasn't normal." From the window of our apartment, on the 12th floor, I could see all of Guadalajara shining with lights, and for a moment I felt like I was looking down on my life, as if it were all a strange dream from which I couldn't wake up. I tried to sleep around 11 p.m., but it was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those scenes from the church again. The people screaming, Valentina fainting, and speaking in those strange languages. The feeling of not having control over my own voice made me toss and turn in bed, sweating cold, even though the air conditioning was set at 18 superscript OC. Esperanza also slept restlessly, moving a lot, waking up every now and then to check if I was okay. Around midnight, I got up to drink water in the kitchen. The house was completely silent, except for the sound of the living room clock ticking away. I stayed a few minutes on the balcony from the apartment, on the 12th floor, looking out over the city of Guadalajara below, the car lights passing by on Avenida Lopez Mateos. Everything was so normal, so ordinary, as if nothing extraordinary had happened a few hours before. I returned to my room trying to convince myself that it had just been a bout of stress, of tiredness, that the next day everything would be back to normal. I took 2 valerian pills I had been hoping for at the nightstand, the ones she uses when she's very nervous, hoping they would help me rest a little, but at 2:07 a.m., everything changed in a way I could never have imagined. I was in a kind of half-sleep when I felt a drastic change in the room's temperature, in a matter of seconds. The temperature dropped so much that I could see my own breath forming a mist in the air. It was impossible. It was July, the height of the Guadalajara summer, but I still pumped about 25 grams during the early morning. Suddenly, it was about 10 degrees below zero inside our room. Esperanza was sleeping soundly next to me, covered up to her neck, breathing heavily, like someone not about to wake up so soon. I thought about waking her up, but before I could move, I realized there was a presence in the darkness of the room. It wasn't just a sensation, it was something concrete, something that occupied space, that changed the density of the air around it. My heart began to beat so hard that I was sure I was going to wake Esperanza, but she continued sleeping as if nothing was happening. The smell that began to fill the room was horrible, like rotten meat mixed with sulfur, so strong it was sickening to the soul. Little by little, my eyes began to adjust to the different darkness that had taken over the room, and then I saw it. A figure was standing in the corner between the dresser and the window. It was a shadow, but a shadow that had substance, that had a definite shape. As I looked at him, the figure became clearer, more real. It was a man or something shaped like a man, but much taller than any normal person. He must have been about 3 meters tall, with broad shoulders, and on his head, he had 2 golden horns that glowed with their own light. Even in the darkness of the room, his eyes were like 2 red embers that pulsed as if there was fire inside them. I couldn't see his face well, but I knew he was watching me, studying me, as if I were an insect on a microscope slide. I tried to move, to scream, to rouse hope, but my body wouldn't obey. It was as if I were paralyzed, aware of everything, but powerless to do anything. "Don't be afraid, Miguel," said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I've been waiting for this moment for a long time." That's when the creature began to speak. The voice didn't come from any specific place. It was as if it came from the walls, the ceiling, the floor, from everywhere at once. A deep, deep voice that made the window panes vibrate subtly. "Miguel," said the voice, and hearing my name spoken that way made me feel a chill that went far beyond the icy temperature of the room. "You are my 20-year project. The time has finally come for you to understand who is really in control of your life." With each word the creature spoke, that horrible smell took over the room, a smell of rotten flesh mixed with sulfur, so strong it was nauseating. But the worst part wasn't the smell or the creature's appearance. The worst part was the feeling of familiarity, as if deep in my soul I recognized that presence, as if it had always been there watching, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The creature continued with a laugh that echoed throughout the room. He said to me, "The Lady Valentina that you slept with, is my favorite fallen angel. It has destroyed 47 pastors since 2010, and you were number 43. The creature approached the bed, and with each step it took, objects in the room began to move on their own. The Bible that was on the nightstand flew up and fell to the floor, open exactly to the page of Revelation 3, verse 16, that verse about being lukewarm that I had preached so many times. The crucifix Esperanza had hung on the wall above our bed flipped upside down with a thud. The dresser drawers opened and closed several times, making a rhythmic noise that resembled macabre music, and through it all, Esperanza continued to sleep heavily, as if under some kind of spell. "She can't see me now," the creature said, as if reading my thoughts. "This conversation is just between the two of us, Miguel, between you and the one who knows all your secrets, all your weaknesses, all your deepest desires." The temperature continued to drop until the cold became unbearable, but my body still couldn't move, as if frozen in time. "I used your admiration for famous pastors like Joel Austin and Kaz Luna to awaken your envy and ambition," the creature said, pacing around the bed like a predator studying its prey. "I knew you wanted the same thing they did, the big churches, the fancy cars, the television fame. That envy was the perfect gateway for other sins to enter your life." The words fell on me like hammer blows because they were true. For years, I had envied the success of other pastors. I had longed to have what they had. Every sermon you've preached in the last 3 months, every word that has come out of your mouth in the pulpit, has been my words. You've been preaching my doctrine in my name, deceiving 3,000 people who trust you. The revelation hit me like a punch in the stomach. It was true. In recent months, I had changed my way of preaching, focusing more on prosperity, on material blessings, on how God wants His children to be rich and successful. Your apartment in Torres del Bosque, your 30,000 peso salary. Everything was arranged by me to feed your pride and greed. Then, the creature did something that marked me forever. It moved even closer to the bed and touched my chest with one of its claws. The pain was instantaneous and excruciating, as if a knife on hot coals were cutting my skin. I screamed, but no sound came out of my mouth. The claw made 6 X-shaped cuts on my chest, marks that remained etched in my skin like a tattoo made with fire. "These marks," the creature said, So you can remember this conversation when you wake up, so you know it wasn't a dream, it wasn't a hallucination, it was real, Miguel, as real as your hypocrisy, your betrayal, your lie. The smell of burning flesh mixed with the smell of sulfur, creating a nauseating combination that permeated the entire room. Tomorrow you're going to discover who Valentina really is, the creature said with that hideous laugh, and when you find out, you'll understand that there's no going back for you, your soul now belongs to me. And then, as suddenly as it had arrived, the presence disappeared, the temperature in the room returned to normal, objects stopped moving, and the horrible smell was gradually fading, but the marks on my chest remained, burning like live coals, physical proof of what had happened. It wasn't a figment of my imagination. Esperanza slept peacefully until dawn, unaware that her husband had just had a face-to-face encounter with the same evil and that our life, our family, our church, would never be the same after that early morning. I lay awake the rest of the night, touching the marks on my chest, feeling them burn, remembering every word the creature had said. I knew my life had changed forever, that there was no way back to being the same Miguel I had been. As dawn began to break over Guadalajara, with the sun rising behind the hills, I realized that I was waiting with terror and curiosity to see what would happen when I discovered the truth about Valentina. Because something inside me told me that this revelation was going to be even more terrifying than the encounter I had just had with the very same Monday passed in a confusing blur of events that I could barely process. I woke up with the X marks still burning on my chest, 6 perfect lines that looked like they'd been made with a hot iron. Esperanza saw the marks when she woke up and freaked out, asking how I had hurt myself during the night. I made up some excuse about having allergies and scratching myself a lot, but I saw in her eyes that she didn't believe me. All day I tried to reach Valentina on her cell phone, but her number didn't exist. I went to the church to look for her, but no one knew where she was. It was as if she had evaporated after Sunday service. The members of the church searched for me all day, wanting explanations about what had happened in the pulpit. I made up various excuses: stress, tiredness, low blood pressure, but deep down I knew something much bigger and more dangerous was happening to me. The creature's words echoed in my mind: tomorrow, you'll find out who Valentina really is, and I had a terrible feeling that this discovery would change everything. That night, when I passed by the Minerva gazebo on my way home, I remembered all the times I had taken the kids there on Sundays when we were a normal, happy family. Monday night, I tried to sleep, but it was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those golden horns again. I heard that deep voice echoing in the room. I smelled the sulfur that seemed to have settled in my nostrils. Esperanza slept in the back room. She said I was very agitated, talking to myself in my sleep. The kids avoided me all day, clearly scared by what they had witnessed at church and by my strange behavior at home. Sebastian even asked his mum if I was going crazy. Sophia, my 12-year-old daughter, barely spoke to me. She just watched me from a distance, like a child who senses something is seriously wrong, but they don't understand why. The whole house seemed to have a heavy atmosphere, as if the evil presence from the previous morning had left some kind of spiritual mark on the air. Around 10 o'clock p.m. on Monday, I took 2 sleeping pills. What kind of hope did I use when I was very anxious? I needed to rest, I needed to stop thinking, I needed to forget for a while, hours of the nightmare my life had become. But even with the pills, sleep didn't come. It was as if my soul was too restless to rest.